A Thunder Bay man at the center of a fraud ring is currently awaiting sentencing in the Norval Morrisseau Art fraud investigation. Gary Lamont was one of 8 people accused of forgery and fraud after a years-long police investigation. Police seized more than 1,000 paintings that are suspected forgeries of the Anishinaabe artist's work. Jonathan Sommer is an art fraud lawyer and CEO of Morrisseau Art Consulting. CBC Thunder Bay reporter Michelle Allan spoke with him today.
So yesterday, a Thunder Bay man pleaded guilty to 2 charges in this Morrisseau art fraud investigation. How did that feel?
Well, it's a massive relief. I've been fighting this fight since 2009 on an almost daily basis, and we've struggled to convince courts at times to accept that there's a fraud. And then even when they'd accept that there was a fraud, they didn't seem to be willing to accept anything specific about that fraud. So to have one of the key figures that we've been interested in admit to his guilt in terms of creating fake Morrisseaus, that's a huge step forward.
So when you say there's been a reluctance to recognize that fraud has occurred, why do you think that is?
I think there's a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that each of the courts that's been asked to make that determination has been asked to make it in relation to usually a single painting. But they also had the knowledge that the single painting they were going to be making a ruling on was related to a lot of other paintings. And so I think that there may have been a hesitation because of that they didn't want to massively affect the entire Norval Morrisseau art market by ruling on a single painting. I think another reason is that I think that courts, police, the public in general don't seem to take art fraud that seriously. And so I think that they treat it almost like an amusing spectacle, a tale of charming rogues that defraud people who have more money than they know what to do with. Unfortunately, as we've all seen with this particular art fraud, that's certainly not the case. The vast majority of the victims of the fraud are people with, of modest means or of, middle upper class collectors for whom these paintings are a big investment. And as far as the crimes that underlie it, we had, this particular man, Gary Lamont, who pled guilty today. He's also been convicted of multiple sexual assaults, and he's a bad dude. And there's a lot of really ugly criminality that's connected with this art fraud. The failure of courts and police before recently to accept and acknowledge this fraud is all the more tragic because of the terrible implications that have come with this particular fraud, which involves sexual assaults, which involve the exploitation of Indigenous people, and all kinds of ugliness like that.
What has this, proliferation of fraudulent artwork done to Morrisseau's legacy?
I think it's severely muddied his legacy. Morrisseau had his own language that he spoke with through his artwork. And when people make fakes, they distort and undermine that language. They confuse it. And so they undermine essentially his legacy, and they undermine the relationship between viewers of the art and who Morrisseau really was. And so I think it's kind of tragic in that way.
So in terms of the amount of fraudulent art that's out there, how significant is that impact?
Well, by our estimates, the fake works probably significantly exceed the number of authentic works. So you're dealing with a preponderance of fakes in the Morrisseau market. And, that isn't just a distorting effect. That's an overwhelming and destroying effect, I would say.
Why do you think fraudsters target this one artist in particular?
Well, if you're an art fraudster, there's 2 main things you're going to look for in a target artist. One is you want an artist whose record keeping is not great. And Norval's life was fairly chaotic at times, and there are many artworks he produced for which no clear record was produced. He didn't stay with one gallery his whole career that kept scrupulous records. There were paintings traded to people for things, traded for rent. There were paintings that went through art galleries. There were paintings that were gifts, all that kind of thing. And so that's the first thing that you look for as a fraudster is a history of production that has a lot of gaps in it. The second thing you would look for is an artist whose style is fairly easily reproducible. And what I say that, I want to be careful about how I say that, because a real Morrisseau is a marvelous piece of work. His ability to use composition, color, his iconography is all very sophisticated. But people can produce works that look similar to his in a superficial way, and in a way that is good enough to fool many members of the public and even some people in the art community who aren't intimately familiar with Morrisseau's language.
Okay. So in terms of where we go from here, what are you hoping to see happen to make things right?
Well, the first thing is that when Gary Lamont appears at his sentencing on December 14th, there's going to be a public reading of the agreed statement of facts between him and the Crown. And that is where he has to tell the story of how it is that he committed these crimes. That's going to be very, very interesting to hear, because it should expose all kinds of details about his production, about his distribution, potentially about who was involved. So we're very much looking forward to that, and that will add, I think, significantly to the current body of evidence, which is massive, about this fraud. And then from there, well, it's a question of, it's going to be up to, for the most part, it's going to be up to people who are the victims of the fraud to decide what they want to do. You know, some of them will know for sure right away, based on the information they're hearing, whether their paintings are fake or not. Other people may have questions, and it may not be totally clear, because the fake works come in a variety of styles, and they have different characteristics. And so I think a lot of those people will have to think seriously about whether they are going to do something about having been defrauded, or whether they're just going to put the artworks on their wall as interesting pieces of history and part of a massive fraud.
That was art fraud lawyer Jonathan Sommer speaking with our Thunder Bay colleague Michelle Allan. For more on this story, go to cbc.ca/Thunder Bay or download the CBC News app.